All righty. All right, looks like we have a quorum. We have people coming in. So I'd like to call the Stockbridge Bowl Stewardship Commission meeting for March 31st, 2023 to order at 8:02 a.m. First on our agenda is approval of two sets of minutes, January 13th, 2023 and February 24th, 2023. Did everybody have a chance to read those?
Yep. I make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Pat is aye. Michael Nathan? You're muted, Mike.
I'm guilty of not having read them well enough. I mean, really, I scanned through them, but I didn't really read them, so I really can't comment. My gut feeling is everybody else thinks that they're fine, that I'm sure they're
Okay. I'll count you as an abstention.
right. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so the minutes have been approved. Any updates that we have on public awareness and education? So I'll start with Sally, just because I know that Concom has been working on the brochure. And
Yeah, I was thinking about that on the way down. I gotta get back with David and see if he made the one change that we needed in the thing. I haven't seen an update, so I'll have to do that.
Okay, so nothing from conservation, anything from zebra mussel?
Yeah, I got a couple
Territory.
of, we can distribute any written material or posters down at the boat ramp. And we can also do it over at Bullard Woods. We have a new kiosk coming in over there with a big bulletin board on it.
Okay,
So we can have either giveaways, put handouts, or we can put up notices or whatever we need.
okay, that's great. And there is one more rack that can go at the boat ramp. Also, another one of the lucite holders.
Yeah, sure, we have plenty of room.
So I have another one of those. So there'll be
Okay.
even more space there.
Yep.
Okay. Anything from anyone else? All righty, then moving on. So the next item on the agenda was per Pat Canelli's request, discussing the potential expansion of the weed harvesting. And I was hoping that Michael Canales would be here, but I don't see him. So unfortunately, he's not with us. But I say Pat and is it Beth Goodman is here? Yeah. I would say you could probably start it out. I know that, at this point, what we're talking about and what's being worked on is an extension of the existing NOI. And just with the assurance that we can do the 10 acres of harvesting and obviously a change of the map because we no longer are avoiding certain areas that were indicated on the map before. So that's what's going on currently. And I would say, Pat, why don't you lead it off and go through the rationale with Beth?
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. Yeah, certainly the first thing we want to point out is that we do not at all want to jeopardize what we currently have in place in terms of our ability to harvest. That having been said, we believe that it would be possible to file under a different section of the Wetlands Protection Act and be able to harvest additional acreage to the 10 that we are limited to right now. To start off, the town would be the entity that would file the NOI, but what the Stockbridge Bowl Association is offering is to do the legwork to prepare an NOI for expanded coverage. And I'll get to the rationale of why we think that this is possible. So we would do all the work to do that and write up the NOI, but then turn it over to the town for them to submit and to perhaps make changes as they think is appropriate. But the idea is that we're offering to do all of the, if you will, heavy lifting and work to get this done present it to the town, and then have the town submit it, assuming that they approve of it. And again, if they need or want to make any changes to what we submit, that's certainly within their purview. So that's the basic of what we want to put on the table. And we believe by going under a different section of the Wetlands Protection Act, under a limited project, we could expand the acreage that we would be allowed to harvest. And the notion being that under a limited project, if you can demonstrate that there are no adverse impacts on any wildlife or protected species, that this would be permitted by the DEP and by NHESP. And I sent the document, and Roxanne has it posted in the packet. So I don't want to, unless you want to, go through it item by item, but basically it lays out the logic train of if we apply under this different section, we would have to obtain a no adverse impact letter from NHESP. So we would apply to them for that. We would then ask the Stockbridge Conservation Commission to waive the wildlife habitat evaluation, since assuming the NHESP approves it, would override that. And again, going through all of the logic, we basically have adverse effects are defined to mean no alteration after 2 growing seasons that would, quote, substantially reduce its capacity to provide the important wildlife habitation functions listed in the regulations, essentially food, shelter, breeding, and areas for wildlife. If the Conservation Commission would still want to require a wildlife habitation evaluation, the SBA would certainly do that and pay for that and all the associated costs to make that happen. And I believe we have enough experience with having harvested the bowl over the years in much more acreage than we are currently permitted to do, that we know that wildlife habitat will come back. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I asked Beth to join us today because I'm sure you'll have questions that may be above my pay grade to answer, and she'll be able to do that. And I just thought it was the most efficient way to proceed, was to look at this, get your reactions, field your questions, and see what happens next.
Okay. Anyone have any questions about this?
Yeah, I just, DEP is usually not happy about having 2 filings for the same work at the same time, just as an FYI.
Yeah, Sally, we had briefly touched on that at the last meeting. And also, Beth, chime in with this. I think the way when we would file it, I believe one would have to supersede the other, but we'd also, again, want to make sure that we didn't get stuck in some kind of limbo where we had no harvesting permit. I mean, that's the ultimate, one of the goals here is to always have something in place so that we can harvest. Is that making sense, Sally? I mean, in terms of doing that?
Yeah, I just know that that's been our experience, is that they want one notice of intent or order of conditions closed out before they open another one.
Okay. Beth, any thoughts on that?
Hi. Yeah, I think that if you are already in process getting the NOI for the 10 acres, it makes sense that we just say to DEP, if you approve this other NOI, which takes more work in the sense that we have to get natural heritage sign off. We have to talk with your commission, Sally, about whether they would need a wildlife evaluation, get that if we need it, you know, like that's going to take time. And so I think it's fine to explain to DEP that in the meantime, if there's ability to harvest, we're going to use this 10-acre NOI. And if you approve an NOI for different, we will close the 10-acre. I mean, we don't have to say we need 2 in operation at the same time. That's all. We just have to explain.
And also, I think just because of where we are in the timing, I don't think that we'll be able to do this for this season, but I at least want to get started so that we potentially can do it for the next season.
Right, I was thinking the same thing, Pat, that this is really a timing issue at this point. For one thing, this certainly, right now, we're moving forward. We have another year on this NOI. I think we're fine with the 10 acres. That's not an issue at all. And if we, then we have to look at, do we want to go through all of this? The other impact is going to be, when is dredging going to start? And we don't want it to coincide with all the dredging permits, because we won't be harvesting. We know that that will be an issue with NHESP. We cannot be doing two major projects at once. And if we're expanding this at the same time that we're talking about moving forward with dredging, I think that's going to be an issue. It doesn't mean we still can't do it. I think that the timing, though, is fairly sensitive.
Yeah, and Roxanne, to your point, I believe it's stated in the lake management plan that we would not be doing harvesting in the year that dredging takes place. And that being the case, whether we're harvesting 10 acres or up to 20 acres, we still wouldn't be harvesting. So I don't see this necessarily as conflicting with that. And also, since I think best case scenario is dredging won't begin until 2026, we still have 2020, assuming that we do the 10 acres this year in 2023, we still have 24 and 25 that we would be harvesting before the dredging begins. And if we could harvest more than the 10 acres in those 2 years, I think it's only to the good.
Right. Right. I do have a generic question here, and maybe Beth can answer it, maybe Sally can answer it. What is, for the public, what is a water dependent limited project? I hadn't seen that wording before, and I was just curious. How would you give an example of that? I mean, what does it really mean?
So there are many projects defined in, this is Beth, if that's all right. You want me to answer that, Pat?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, sorry. And Madam Chairman. There are many limited projects in the wetlands regulations. So you can build a driveway to get to an upland. You can build a driveway through a wetland to get to an upland. That's a limited project. And Sally knows, she probably knows these all by heart. But there are special limited projects that are done that are dependent on water, in fact, are in water. This one, obviously, harvesting, there's no question about whether it could be done outside of the water. So it's a water dependent project, and it's limited because they've described this work as something that you can do under their special limited project definitions.
Okay, well, I think that kind of explains it, because obviously, to me, it's like, yes, of course, this is a water dependent limited project, but, giving that the counterpoint of the other kinds of examples that are not necessarily water dependent. Okay.
That's
all
right.
Any other comments or questions from any members?
Patrick's got to
Patrick's on.
Oh, Patrick?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm, we have an order of conditions in place for the 10 acres. It's not a notice of intent.
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right, that's fine. And my second question is, do you have a map of areas you feel we need to be harvesting that are outside the 7.8 to 10 acres that we have now?
The map had to be modified, but the map is basically just the perimeter and down the channel. That's how it was defined prior to plugging in the areas that had to be avoided.
Right, I'm asking a question. Do we feel like there's some inadequacy in the coverage that we had recently? I mean, we had the issue with the blue harvester. We had the issue with staffing because it was hard to hire people last summer. But just in general, Michael, maybe do you have a sense of where we would extend the map, or Pat, or anyone?
A bit. I mean, that would be one of the, frankly, work items that needed to be done. Looking at, for example, the maps or the survey that Tom Coote did last summer, there were continuous acreages of milfoil. And this isn't only about milfoil, but I'm just saying where there's dense plant life. And also just from all of our constituents around the lake who are finding that it's difficult to boat or to do things. And we just, because of the 10 acres, we couldn't get there. But there would definitely have to be a map drawn up for this to say, where are we proposing to go?
Right, I mean, I'm assuming also that any extension is going to be for practicality and people being able to navigate, et cetera. It's not going to necessarily be in that big stand at the north end of the lake because how much is going on there? You're going to be dealing with any dock areas, any residential homes, that kind of thing on the perimeter of the lake, correct?
Yes, Roxanne, I mean, I think we'd have to prioritize that exact kind of thing. You know, usage, people who want to swim or boat or dock. Yeah, exactly.
Right, so I mean, it'll be a targeted map and it's just going to be an extension of what we have now. But yeah, I think that requires study and that could change year to year as well.
It certainly always seems to be a moving target, but we would have to, and we know that Coot usually goes out in August and we could augment those studies, but we need to wait a bit until things come up to be able to see where those patches would be. And yeah, and that's one of the things we can look at year over year is where we keep getting density of aquatic plant life.
Right. Michael, Nathan?
Just a suggestion. We can, when we go out in the spring to look where the issues are, maybe we can map out with the GPS what areas, if it's done with a GPS, Mike, maybe you can help me on this, and then figure out how many acres that actually is. In terms of, we make the areas that we want to do, and then with Google Earth or something, you can figure out how many acres that really is by the dimension, the width, and the length. Because generally, year after year, it's pretty much the same. It used to be that we would go around the perimeter of the lake and then down the outlet. And it would be curious to me how many acres that actually was when we had free reign of doing the bowl. And that'll give us an idea how much we really need, because going deeper into the lake is really difficult for the harvester. I mean, it doesn't reach that far down, but it's really where to give the biggest relief to recreational and people who enjoy using the lake. But I think it can be done mathematically this spring, going out and mapping out with a GPS system or something of where we want to go, and then figure out how many acres that actually is.
Yeah, I'm sure we could do something with the GPS. The other thing I think that would be interesting is to look at how much habitable area do we have? And then what percentage is this, whatever, 10 or 15 acres of the total? And that might be interesting to look at. And I don't know if we have that kind of data. Do we have that data, Sally?
No, I don't know.
I don't know, because I mean, there are some fairly large areas where it's obviously lots of aquatic plants, especially the north end. And there's certain areas where there's, a great deal of habitat. So it would be interesting to see what the percentage is that we're talking about, because we're not talking about an enormous increase here. It's an enormous increase if you look at that, well, we're going from 10 to 20 acres. But what does that really represent in the overall picture of the aquatic plant life that's there? And it may not be that significant. Just a suggestion.
Also, Roxanne, to your point, unfortunately, a lot of the rules seem to be of a set percentage, and it doesn't matter how big your lake is. So and I've seen 375, 377, whatever the acreage is of the bowl, but that's different from a lake that's half its size, and yet we're constricted to the same kinds of acreage. So I think that those are valid points to look at it. And the other thing that Mike said is, once you're into the deep center part of the lake, you're not encountering, because the plants don't come up that high. So that's not even something to worry about, the deep center of the lake.
No, exactly. All right, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Michael? Oh, sorry.
No, I just had, hold on a second. Am I
Go ahead,
muted?
Michael.
I just want to know, Pat, do you know what, or Roxanne or Sally, what was the amount that NHESP or DEP Did they give you, do we have an actual acreage that we can harvest, or is it a percentage? Do you know?
Acreage.
It's an acreage.
10.
It's an acreage.
Yeah.
So every lake has the same 10 acres acreage if you're
No.
5,000 acres or 370 acres?
No, as
How
far
does
as
that
I
work?
know, it's based on whatever your NOI states.
Oh, no, I thought, in the conversation, I thought I heard that Pat had mentioned that it's the same percentage or the same acreage per lake, or in any lake, or am I hearing it wrong? Pat, am I hearing it wrong?
No, that was my understanding. And there's something here, I'm looking at one of the
Maybe
things. It
Elizabeth
talks about
can
the
help us.
threshold is 10% or 5,000 square feet, whichever is less. So if you're at a, 377 acre thing, 10% is a lot more than 5,000 square feet, but it's whichever is less. So
5,000 square feet.
What threshold, Pat?
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
want
what
me to
threshold are you
answer
talking
that?
about? What threshold are you talking about?
This is
Can you hear me?
Beth. Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, please, Beth. I'm a little trouble hearing at the moment.
So the town has applied and the current permit is under a different provision, which has acreage limitations. And that's what Pat was reading. Your current NOI says that it's a beneficial use. And under the regulation that they used, there's an acreage limitation. You can only do 10% or 5,000 square feet, whichever is less. That's the problem. The method of application was under a provision that has acreage limitation, and so you can never exceed that
So how
in
did we
the
get
NOI
to
you
10
have.
How did we get to 10 acres then? If it's
Yeah.
whichever less?
Because it's 400,000 square feet, it's 10 acres.
I would have to look up the provision under which you filed, but I believe you filed under section 1063E, and it was for up to 10 acres, and I'd have to see what the limitation is. But there's no acreage limitation if you apply for a limited project, water dependent. So it's just a different regulatory
Right.
provision.
Okay.
And the one you have, I think you were actually limited to less than 10, weren't you?
Well,
Aren't you
only
limited to-
only because of the herbicide project, which then we started with a 10. And then because of the herbicide project, we had to carve out the various test and control areas. And so that subtracted from the 10. Because it was falling within the same area that we were going to be harvesting.
So
Right, so-
typically we have a buffer, do we not, of the size of the test plots?
Yeah, the current permit is for 7.8 acres, I believe.
Right. That was elimination after the elimination of the test and control areas. What did you say, Sam?
I said, so we have the amount of the test and control areas that we are, if we're not at 10% yet, we can add that acreage into our harvesting, can we not?
Right, but the 10 acres originally was carved out and it was basically a path all the way around. And
Right.
then the test and control areas were overlaid on that,
Right,
which then reduced from 10 to 7 point whatever.
yeah, I get that,
Yeah,
but,
but we're still at 10. That's the limit.
yeah, but if we haven't been doing 10, then we have 2.2 acres
Right,
that we can do that we didn't do before,
exactly. The intent this year is to harvest the 10 acres.
right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? I mean, I think, Pat, the basic, we'll move forward. Oh, I'm sorry, Patrick, did you have something else?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank Pat Kennelly for putting this in. I think it's if it can get approved, I think it would be great to have more flexibility with both where and how much we harvest, and I think that's a good thing. I would I think that somebody maybe wants to talk to David Cameron. I talked to him briefly in the hallway after the CONCOM meeting, the planning board meeting last week. His only concern was that we might want to go and have a pre-approval meeting at the DEP. So I think that we might it's basically a meeting to get their advice on what they think. I think to the point of whoever said it, we don't want to put the current order of conditions that's in place at risk with the new notice of intent. But other than that, I think that it sounds like a really good idea. So good. I'd be happy to put it on our agenda if this board wants to advance it, and if the Conservation Commission feels it's appropriate.
Right. Again, though, this is a timing issue. So for this year, we're just moving forward with the path that we're on. But subsequent years, I think it makes sense to look at this and try to move forward with it. And I certainly thank the SBA and Pat Kennelly for a most generous offer, quite frankly. And a big part of this is doing the work. We run a fairly tight ship here in Town Hall, so we don't have massive amounts of employees. And anytime that we can lift some of that time constraint, one of these tasks that takes a lot of time, a lot of phone calls, a lot of back and forth, I mean, it's very much appreciated. So I wanted to thank you, Pat, and the SBA.
Roxanne, and thank you. And part of the reason I wanted to bring it to this body is because this is, to me, we wanted your nod to say to go ahead, and, the idea that the select board would also be, no one is committing to doing it, but we want to make sure that people want to do this. And then the SBA is certainly willing to commit the time and the money to get this done, to present it to you. We just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to go through all of this and you were going to say, no, we don't want to do this. So that was my main concern. And what I'm hearing is people are saying yes, and it won't work for this year, but we've got a lot of work to do anyway. So we have the harvesting as it's set up now, and we move forward to try and get this for 2024. Is that what that's what I took out of this, I'm hoping. And then we'll move forward to do what we need to do.
Okay, well, as this body, do we want to put our blessing on this in terms of moving forward in the future to try to expand what we're actually harvesting?
Absolutely.
I have a question. So understanding that we are not going to do two projects at the same time, we're not going to harvest and we're not going to dredge in the same year. Is 2024 the first time that we're going to be able to act, or can we act on it this spring of 2023 with the harvesting?
No, this spring is already being worked on, so we'll have the 10 acres for this summer.
All right, so this is done.
This is the final year of this particular order of conditions.
So this is going forward,
This is
2024.
going forward.
And one more question. We haven't spoken about herbicides in quite some time. Where is that in the whole scheme of things?
Right now, we don't have any active herbicide project, as far as I understand. Is that correct, Pat?
That is correct. I think we need to continue to monitor, and we are with Tom Coote coming out in the summers and seeing what's happening with milfoil. The SBA's position is that if it comes to a point, we think that, and that's why we decided not to do the fluoridone in the test, is that there's a new treatment called Procellacor that we think is much better in terms of dealing with the problem that we have. But to your point, John, we need to identify exactly the plant life and figure out if there's a problem that needs to be addressed in that manner. So at the moment, to Roxanne's point, no, there is no plan on the table, but it's something that the SBA would like to continue to monitor and watch. And if appropriate, then we might ask to use Procellacor as a spot treatment in certain places.
Thank you.
Procellacor was just denied in Lake George, just an FYI.
Yes, I've heard the same thing.
No.
So I think, the longer we have to gain information about any of these approaches, the better. But I think moving forward, like for 2024 or beyond, in terms of, maybe starting to expand our harvesting would be great. I mean, because like you said, Pat, for years and years, we harvested a whole lot more. We know it doesn't damage, it isn't going to wipe out the wildlife. It is not going to destroy a significant amount of habitat, as long as it's targeted and it makes sense. Michael, Nathan, you had a question?
Well, I have just one of the, talking to Hugh, I don't know who speaks to him, but if we have two machines going out, I just want to make sure, I want to make sure, the town should make sure, to just how do we, will he have enough people to run these machines? I know that we want to extend acreage and we want to do more, but one of the issues that we had even last year was getting drivers. And I know that we've had volunteers, I think, step up from around the lake. I've stepped up, and I think Pat, who else stepped up from SBA? I think someone stepped up.
Yerman has applied.
Steve Yerman has applied.
From the SBA
Somebody else
So
has
I'm
this
wondering
year?
if we should, if someone or Patrick, if maybe we could get together with him to sort of make sure that we have enough people, or how that's done, because I know when they've put out ads before, it's been very hard getting people to do the
Michael?
harvesters.
Yeah, Michael, I've got to interject here. I mean, this is basically the responsibility of the town administrator in terms of staffing. Now, if we have volunteers, they should formally volunteer, and that is send an email or speak directly to Michael Canales, and, put their name out there if they're interested and willing. And we don't know at this point if we're still, I don't know if it's still as bad out there in terms of employment. A lot of this is, post-COVID impact. So we just weren't getting any responses. We don't know what that's going to be. And I don't have any broader knowledge of what's going on in the universe. But in terms of employment, but this is the responsibility of the town administrator. So I'd say anyone who wants to volunteer, formally volunteer in writing, and that's preferable. So it can be an email to the town administrator, and then it's his responsibility to make sure that we're staffed up.
I understand 100% that it's his responsibility. I mean, the harvester's his responsibility also, but why I'm saying that is maybe if he feels that it's okay to reach out to the SBA members, if they're volunteers, just like Steve Yerman did, that if, that maybe we could get 2 or 3 volunteers that live full time. If they don't live here full time, it's very hard because you need to do the harvester during the week, basically. And it's just getting his thoughts. That's all.
Okay, well, that's something the SBA could do. You could do that in one of your meetings and put it out there and say, are there any volunteers? And here's what you do. Put it in writing and it goes to the town administrator so he's aware of all the people that might be available.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We would be happy to do that. And Stu has actually formally applied. He's come to town hall and made an application to do this. And I can see if we can recruit anybody else if it's needed. And it sounds like it might be. So let us try to do that.
Guys, we're not allowing volunteers on the harvesting equipment. Michael had some exception because we put him on payroll, I think, at the end of the summer. You got a check for $12 or something. Michael, I just talked to Michael. The town administrator feels that the liability issues have to be covered by insurance. You have to be an employee. That doesn't mean they can't apply to be an employee, but we just can't let it's sort of not the same as it used to be, where people like me would, be out on the thing. So anyway, we're not doing volunteers this year. Now, having said that, I think that there's a couple of obvious solutions that, the principal at Monument and the superintendent, Peter Dillon. There are kids looking for summer jobs. We can actually maybe try to do a little bit more recruiting. I get that it's Michael's job. I will talk to him about that.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Go to the schools. But you have to understand that as a volunteer, you do have to be an employee. You can be an unpaid employee. So all volunteers are considered employees of towns. It's true of EMTs and fire and so on. But yeah, you have to go through this formal process, but if you're volunteering your time, then you're basically an unpaid employee. Mike Buffoni.
To Michael Nathan's point earlier, 10 acres just seems like such a little amount around that lake. And I don't know, is it 10 acres and the outlet, do we know, or is it just 10 acres period?
Total is 10. And that included going to the various docks in the channel. So one shot, 2 docks.
So do we
Plus the
know,
center of the
do we know, like Michael mentioned, using a GPS to kind of calculate what we used to do? Maybe it's 50 acres or I don't know. Do we know jumping this NOI 15 to 20 acres is going to get us what we really want around the entire lake? Or I think Michael makes a really good point on trying to do some, I don't know what kind of programming you can use. I'm sure an engineer could figure it out pretty easy, shading in an area and see how many acre feet it is. And
The GPS unit will do that.
yeah.
So you can set a point and then you travel and you set a point, you travel, you set a point, you end up with whatever shape and it'll calculate out.
Yeah.
So that GPS unit will be useful for this.
That would be really interesting to know, because I mean, like we said, we used to be able to, when I was a kid running it, we used to be able to go anywhere. We did the whole entire lake, and just 10 acres just seems like such a small number to me.
You can do the
20
same
acres
thing.
seems like
Yeah.
a small number to
You
me.
can do the same thing on Google Earth, by the way, because I've
Yeah.
done it before. Like back in the day when we were talking about all this stuff, and it might have been for the other invasive. But if you go on Google Earth, you can do the same kind of thing, that you can measure an area. And that's why I think it would be really interesting to look at all the vegetated areas, all of the habitat, and take a measurement of all of the habitat, and then go out and say, okay, where are the targeted areas that we really believe we should be doing more harvesting? And then plot that out and see how they correlate. What's the percentage? Are we talking about a massive amount? And I don't think so. I think there's so much out there that even expanding it, I don't think it's going to be hugely significant to the total habitable area. So I don't know. What do you think, Sally?
Well, we did it for, I don't know how many years, and
50.
it seemed to have functional fish, and
Right.
the snails are still there, and
Yeah. And diversity of species and a lot of different species.
I mean, right now, and I've said this a million times, when you harvest and you take out all that plant material, you're preventing that from going down to the bottom of the lake and creating more both eutrophication and fertilization. So it's definitely a net gain.
One thing, on this new NOI, is it possible that we can tell them that if this is approved, we will concurrently file to remove the old 10-acre NOI
We could do that.
permit?
That would work.
Okay.
It's done fairly often,
Okay.
that the certificate of compliance is requested at the same time that a new NOI is requested.
So that's the way around it. Okay.
So,
Can I
and
ask,
for next step,
isn't it true that this one expires in 20, after the summer, 2023?
After this summer, yeah.
But I would,
And are you sure you can go from the 7.9 to 10? Because this special conditions
Yeah.
I'm looking at only says 7.9.
yeah, I
There
think
were
that there's
none- I'm sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think we should be cautious about making assumptions as to what's permitted under the order conditions. And at the same token, we've got, I don't think the limiting factor was the order of conditions. Frankly, I think in the last season it was the blue harvester being down, so we only had one, and the lack of operators. So, but my sense is if we want to look at this, we should just have maybe the pre-approval meeting this summer with DEP, get their feedback, and then, we can decide, go or no go from that. I think it's a reasonable, I think it's a reasonable idea, but I also think we've had other issues that have been kind of the limiting factor in terms of actually getting it harvested lately. The equipment broke down and,
Well,
And can I make
all
one
that
more
aside,
point?
no, I need to clarify something here.
Oh.
So I may not have been clear enough earlier, but basically Michael Canales right now is working on this in terms of this summer. So that's being ironed out, Beth. And I would suggest just talk to Mike Canales directly.
I would
Thank
also
you.
strongly suggest that an extension be filed for the current NOI, just in case things go sideways. You must apply outside of 30 days
Yeah.
of the expiration. And then at least it's in place, even if it turns out to be a rocky road on getting the new one.
Okay, good point, Sally.
Hello?
I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I wasn't sure if I was on or not. Is that done automatically, Sally?
No, it must be filed for by the applicant.
No, I understand that, but I know in the past when we used to do that, like the the town administrator, I remember it was done automatically by the town administrator. Is he aware to do this? Are they always aware
Yes, he is aware.
because that's the most important thing. We really do need to renew the application regardless.
Right,
Thank you, Sally.
yes, he's very aware.
And then we can just close it out if we need to.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that at least in this group, it sounds like most people are in support of this. I think it makes sense and to continue pursuing it. And I would urge Beth, though, to talk directly to Mike Canales if she's got any questions, because he's the one who's dealing with this currently. And hopefully, he was supposed to be here and unfortunately he didn't make it, but he'll be in the office today.
just a quick question for Beth. How much work is it, if we've got to file an extension anyway, how much work is it if we try to set up a pre-approval process to actually have it drafted? You know, you already did a lot of the work reading the thing that you have. Is it a couple hours or a couple hundred hours for you to finish the notice of intent of an alternate plan, a plan B? Because if we're already filing something this year because it expires, I don't see why we don't just put them both in front of either Concom or the DP and get their feedback.
Madam Chairman, can I reply to him?
Yes.
Is that okay,
Absolutely.
Roxanne?
Yes.
Patrick, there's a couple of things. First of all, a written request or plans have to be filed with the commission for this summer to change the 7.9 acres, which are laid out in the existing order. And the existing order is good for 3 years and it's still good now. What Sally is saying is, in addition to filing a written request to show what you want to harvest this summer under this NOI, you also should apply for an extension for the next summer under this NOI.
I understand
you got
that.
it, and you can get it extended for 3 more years. So she's saying, just to be cautious, 3 more year expansion under this limited NOI.
I understand, but my question is, if we're gonna, why not simply put both of them in front of the regulators at the same time? Is my question.
I agree.
It may just be it's a ton of work. I'm asking how much work it is to do that for you.
No, I agree, but the work for the expanded one, and that's why Sally says just get an extension of this. An extension is easy. You just say we want to do the same thing, and the written amendment or whatever is required to, get the more acreage this summer. Those are easy things. Filing a new NOI is going to require an engineer, maybe Tom Coots analysis, plans, a demonstration of what else is. So it's a new one.
Right, I think there's
Just engineering
Yeah.
work. It's not necessarily my work other than a narrative and the direction of the regulatory
Okay.
compliance. But
Yeah, agreed.
yeah, you're
Beth.
gonna need,
We have to get out there and survey the lake and say where we would
Correct.
actually want to harvest. So that needs to be done.
and
over
then we
this
have to file with Natural Heritage and
Yep.
get their approval. And
Right.
that can be negotiations and, so it's hours of work, yes. But the SBA is offering to your group and to the town to undertake
fine.
this.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah, I
something
understand
that's,
that. So,
but Patrick, it's not something that you're going to rush. You want to do this methodically and thoroughly. And, I trust that the SBA and Beth Goodman are going to do that, but I think it's going to take some time. So yeah, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to iron out the details. Michael Canales will iron out the details, get us to the 10 acres, and then file the extension. And they'll be moving forward with their plans in terms of this new NOI.
That's the way I see it, Roxanne. And again, what I was looking for here was a review with this body, just to make sure that we're on the same page and that we think that this is a good idea. And then we will expend the time, effort, and money to get this done. And it will take time, effort, and money over the summer. But I just want to make sure that everybody wants to do this. And that's what I'm hearing. So I'm a happy camper.
Okay. All righty. Eric, you're out there. Do you have any questions? Okay, hearing none. I think he's the only member of the public out there besides Pat and Beth.
Oh, sorry, Roxanne. I just needed a few seconds to unmute and bring my video back.
Okay, did you have any
Can you see?
questions about this discussion?
No, not this one.
All righty. Well, thanks, and thanks for being here. All righty, so I think we've, taken care of this topic. And I'll be touching base with Mike Canales after the meeting.
Okay.
Stakeholder updates. Do any of us have updates? Sally? No, I don't have anything. Hopefully there's an annual meeting and I'm not sure when it is at the Sportsman's Club, but I want to be there. Maybe you can help me with that.
Yeah, it's usually in May, I think.
Okay. Gary?
Not particularly. We're just, we lost 2 inspectors at the boat ramp this year.
Really?
Yeah, one retired, one passed away. Jen Picard passed away.
what is that pay?
Jen Picard passed away over the winter. She was running the operation for us at the boat ramp.
What is the pay for hourly pay for the boat ramp?
17 an hour.
All right. And does anybody know we're paying the harvesting operators per hour?
It varies year to year, Patrick. You have to talk to Michael Canales.
Okay.
The other thing I did want to mention while I've got you, Patrick, is we are down 1 member in the SBSC. So the select board is going to have to appoint someone. We need someone from the Board of Health.
Okay.
Okay.
One more thing, myself and Kevin Foran are going to pick up the slack wherever there are openings in the inspection this summer.
Okay.
So we're not anticipating hiring anyone right now.
Do you need an announcement by the town of,
I don't
we're
think-
looking for volunteers or?
I don't think, well, I'll find out in another couple of weeks how many people we're going to have.
Okay.
If I do, I'll talk to Mike.
Okay, great. John?
Well, just to clarify, you're looking, the Board of Health would name its own, member. What is the role of select board in that?
I'm sorry, you're kind of,
He wants to know, he thinks Tri-Town will appoint their own representative
well,
rather than the select board,
the select board is the appointing body for
Right,
this
but-
group
but they will
based on our bylaws.
put
And it
forward.
isn't necessarily Tri-Town Health. It's our Stockbridge Board of Health. That is the.
Right. I understand.
So it's
Yeah.
our Board of Health. So it could be someone else from Tri-Town Health. However, I would say the starting point is Stockbridge Board of Health. The only reason that Jim is representing the Board of Health piece is because John is representing water and sewer. He's on the board. So you can't do both. So that's
Well,
what
okay, but,
Charlie Kenny resigned. He was the Board of Health
and then
representative.
Henry's got,
Jim Stepp-
Henry's leaving the Board of Health, so I think there's a candidate who's running to take his seat. I don't think this is going to get done before, one of us reconstitutes the board, Roxanne. So I think maybe we deal with this once the new member is on, in mid-May.
Okay,
Because Henry's not going to take this.
okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, to report from the Sewer Water Commission, we're in phase 4 of the I&I study.
Right.
Tony Campetti was reporting to us that he's almost done. I think there's another few hundred feet of pipe to examine, I think to take it to Beechwood. And after that, we will do the computations as to the costs of repair. And after that, then we'll talk about sewer expansion, which I think is germane to this body. So that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Mike Buffoni.
The sign that we use for water testing is going to be sent out to the company that the service agreement we have with them. It'll be serviced for the upcoming season, and then I'll calibrate it every month before we go out. I have to talk with GZA because I'm not sure, and I have to talk to Chuck because I'm not sure when he puts his boat in. But April, it's obviously still pretty cold, so next month we'll hopefully get out and do our first round. I know GZA comes out usually the first time and maybe sometime in July or whatever, but
First time in July usually.
yeah. So I'll get in touch with Chris Main and the gang and make sure we're on course to get out there next month.
Okay, great, thank you.
I did have something else that I wanted to question Gary about, the floating docks. To my way of thinking, this is a real issue, in that if every person around the lake has a floating dock, which some people would say falls under the dock bylaw, which is limits a day. What?
Patrick, just let Sally.
Which limits the dock to 200 square feet. Even though it's not contiguous, if you start adding floating docks all around the lake, first of all, the work of the harvester is going to be infinitely more difficult. And I'm not sure that I would advocate that that's a really bad idea.
I think the Conservation Commission might want to come out with, have a meeting and discuss some rules and regulations about it. There has to be an understanding that these docks are going to be, they have to obviously be inside the 300-foot no swim zone. They cannot be a hazard to navigation. That's the biggest reason, a hazard to navigation.
Right, but if the harvester is trying to get through and you've got a dock, and I know what it takes to put the docks out, bringing it back in so the harvester can get through is not a simple task.
Well, most of the rafts are easy to just pull up a couple anchors and bring and tow the dock in. But if people want to have harvesting in front of their house and they have a dock out, it's going to have to be their responsibility to bring that dock in. We'll have to let them know a week or so in advance, probably.
And the other question and concern that I have, which is significant, is in the areas where it's narrow, like in the channel and around the island.
Yep.
And already we have docks that have a gazillion boats on them. And if you start putting out swim floats, are people going to start attaching their boats to those? And I just think that this is something that, in terms of lake management, we really need to revisit and think about whether this is something we can go forward with.
We've had a problem with mooring boats, especially in the Beechwood area, because they don't really have a place, to moor them. And I've been telling people to find a place that's not going to be, again, a hazard to navigation and impede other boats' movements to moor them. Other than that, we have no regulations to go by.
Can I weigh in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Roxanne? All right, a couple of things. One, the only regulator for this, according to town council I checked, is Gary. So the harbor master is the only regulatory authority in town who can regulate these floating docks. So or floating pads, whatever they're called. They're actually not docks. The dock has to be attached to the shore. So I think the one issue, Gary, is, if you want to set policies around this, it's you, not Concom. Concom is not the regulator. Now, I think that, though Sally does make a good point, having a proliferation of these docks is I think difficult for the harvesting, especially in many areas of the lake on the southern side. And understand that we don't have a process in place to evaluate requests that are coming in as part of the LPOD or as part of the select board or whatever. If the plans involve a floating dock, we're not allowed to regulate it. This came up last week at the select board meeting, and that's why I checked, because I think Sally makes a good point. I agree with her. And Sally, I would say to you, if you want to edit that bylaw, we should just sit down and spend an hour or two editing it. We could put a new bylaw in front of town meeting that would actually define a floating pad and provide some guidance and regulation. There's holes in our dock bylaw now that, basically we do not regulate these.
That would work. And you'll limit the dock, the total space to 200 square feet?
That's what it's limited to now.
That will put the good top end on it.
Yeah. I mean,
But I think, yeah.
so the floating.
You can't put these docks in the outlet. It just isn't going to work.
Or even in Beechwood, I can't see that there's enough space there for putting floating docks, and plus it's really shallow and.
A long ways out.
I just think this is something we really need to get a handle on before it gets to be a real problem.
Is there time, Patrick, to put together a bylaw that addresses the floating docks to go on the warrant?
Sure, there's other bylaws, there's absolutely time. Yep.
Okay, so I would say, go ahead and work on it, run it by Gary.
Be happy.
Yeah, work with Gary.
Yep.
And my question is, does the 200 feet include the floating dock, or is that a separate entity that's handled separately?
Let's include it. That way they'll
Well,
be,
it's not now.
no, but let's
But that's just a tweak. That's a simple one.
change it.
So you could have a relatively short dock just going out to get from your
That's a 24-foot dock is going to be better part of 100 square feet.
right.
And a dock, usually the docks are probably about 8 by 8. So it's 60, you're approaching that 200 really quickly.
Well, I can tell you that the filings that come for conservation, they take every square inch of that 200 square feet for most of the docks. And we've had.
The one we did. Yep.
We've had some questions
Sorry,
about docks in the outlet. And there has to be 125 feet between the docks, the ends of the docks in the outlet. And so it's some obscure regulation which we found. So there was one that was just put out recently that, you can do it this way so that they're not butting against each other, but it has to be 125 square feet in between, or 125 feet between the ends of the docks, so that you have navigable.
There are places that the
waterways.
channel isn't even 125 feet.
That's right.
So
Yeah, there are places where it's not, right, exactly. So if you could put a floating dock out in the middle of the channel, then that's a real.
I would stand up and say there should be no docks anywhere behind the island. It's
Well,
just,
you're the regulator, so just, if you see any, you have every right to ask them to be removed by the homeowner. So,
Well,
I can
since-
forward everyone Donna's message on this topic. I think the other question I have is I think these aren't docks. We have a dock bylaw. This is not a dock. A floating pad turns out is not the same thing. So I would suggest that we maybe also ban the storage of boats on floating pads, because it's going to just take that 10 by 10 foot thing and it could double or triple the sort of circumference of the thing, not circumference, the radius of the thing, by having boats like kind of hanging off it. So I like Sazra, I'm concerned about the harvesting with a whole bunch of the proliferation of these things.
Okay.
And in
All right.
addition to that, mooring a boat out like a dock is another thing we should address,
Right.
because they're just as much in the way as a dock is.
Right. Although this is outside the purview of this particular group. Michael, Nathan?
I'm a little confused. Sally, maybe you can help me. Do you mean the floating docks like the rafts that are in the middle of the lake? Is that
Yes.
what you meant?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering if you meant floating docks that are at people's shoreline and
No.
go out like a regular. You're talking about floating docks in the middle of the lake.
A swim raft.
A swimmer. Okay. All right. No, I agree. I'll tell you, it could, whenever I go with the harvester, it's not a problem yet, but it should be addressed. It should be addressed.
Okay.
But that's not going to be addressed by this group. So, I mean,
No, I
Sally and
understand.
Gary
I'll take
and Patrick, the select board, and Mike Canales can all work on this. And hopefully you can get something together for it.
You know,
Roxanne,
the
I
other
don't
thing,
think that's going to.
I just have a suggestion just off the top of my head. Maybe for people who need to dock, who need to moor their boats, maybe we find an area on the lake, just like you do, like a cutout, an invisible cutout, but boats have to be moored in this section, so they're out of the way. An area where the harvester doesn't go, or just a suggestion that it's a compromise for people, because right now there are no rules or regulations as to where people can put their boats.
Right, but this is a bylaw change, and this would have to go on the warrant and be voted on. So that's not something that we're going to work on here in the SBSC. This is going to be.
Well, why not?
Because we are not in charge of creating bylaws. We can make this suggestion, and I think it's a great idea, and I completely agree. So if you want, I can formally go to the next select board meeting and make this suggestion. But obviously it's going to be done between the select board and Michael Canales and Gary and with conservation, that you'll have this discussion. And I would suggest to Michael, and I think this would be his idea anyway, is he put together a small working group to bang it out.
Well, I think it's, the reason I brought it up is because it seems to me that this is pretty integral to lake management.
Right, and it impacts on harvesting, and we all agree with you, but the actual nuts and bolts of doing this, Patrick, because that's my point. The nuts and bolts of putting it together do not fall here. You know, you're creating a bylaw, and I would say, Patrick, you could lead the way, because, you know, you're chairman of the select board, so if you want to work on that, but I think it's probably going to be a small working group that would normally hash that out.
I just feel like there's 6 or 7 ideas here that we have to resolve, and the expertise to resolve them is around this table. We have Gary, we have Sally, we have Michael who runs the harvester. Just even bulleting out, we don't need some new working group to get up to speed. This is the working group. So if you want to do it, it's great. I'd be happy to help facilitate the final language of the draft, but the bullet points of what you want this provision to be, that is both helps you manage the lake and make sure that it's not onerous for the land, for the homeowners, I think has to come out of here, or it's not going to get done. Yeah, but it's up to you guys.
Okay, we'll take care of this away from the commission. We'll bring it to the commission when we're done.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be great. All righty, so I do have to get going. I have a lot of work to get done today, so I would move to adjourn.
Wait, I haven't gone yet.
Michael Nathan?
I just wanted to ask.
Well, Michael Nathan had his hand up.
No, I seconded it. That.
Oh, okay. All right. What?
I just had a quick question. What are we doing with the water chestnuts? Is that on track because I know that's happened early.
I don't know exactly. I can touch base with Michael Canales, but yes, the intent is they will be back out this spring and it will be very soon. It has to be by April to mid-May is usually when that happens.
All right, which is,
Sorry.
It's going to depend somewhat on the weather, obviously.
okay,
Okay,
that's all I
so
got. Thanks.
I move to adjourn. Michael Nathan seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.